right, Evan, welcome to the BlockHash podcast, live episode 208. How you doing, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Of course, anytime. Very excited to talk to you and talked about Fauna today and dive into a lot of cool stuff. Tell me first a little bit more about yourself. Very curious about your backgrounds. What did you do in crypto and blockchain before this, or what was your career? How did you kind of lead into Fauna?
Yeah, so I'm Evan. I'm co-founder and CTO of Fauna. Fauna is a serverless database that offers a GraphQL API. So my background is software infrastructure. After grad school, I worked on the chicken genome actually, and never touched bioinformatics again. But it was big data. I worked at CNET. I did Chow.com and Urban Baby, which were early social media sites, and then I worked at Twitter. I was employee 15 at Twitter, and ended up running what we called the software infrastructure team that scaled Twitter.com, built the API, built all the distributed storage, and I kind of spent my career focused on replicated and distributed storage, high scale, low latency consumer applications. And that led into the Fauna project, which is now, philosophically aligned with blockchain. And we see a lot of usage from the crypto community.
Yeah, what was your experience like with Twitter? What role did you have, and how did you like working there?
So it was basically when I joined, it was total chaos. And when I left, it was partial chaos. So we made huge progress in the meantime. But I was there 4 years, 2008 through 2012. Jack Dorsey hired me. I started as an engineer and then became a manager and then ultimately a director of a team of about 35 people. So for us, like, Twitter's challenge was Twitter was the vanguard of mobile first consumer adoption. Like Facebook had come out a couple years before us, and what Facebook was able to do was go school by school. Um, I don't know if any of our listeners remember in the ancient days of the 2000s, but Facebook initially was just a single university kind of application. You can only talk to people who are in the same physical school as you, so they could partition their infrastructure. They didn't have to communicate between these shards, basically, of the application stack. But Twitter was for everybody. There was no segmentation in the network. It was like blockchains in that way. Anyone could communicate and transact with anybody. So we had to solve a lot of technical problems, which were at the time unsolved, especially in social media. It was soft real time, had to be highly available, had to be globally available, and then let anyone post, read, follow, reply, interact, direct message with anyone else, regardless of where they were in the world. So we essentially when I got there, I inherited basically an Apache server, a Rails application, written in Ruby, quite slow, quite unreliable, and a single MySQL server as a database. No replication, no backups, no partitioning, nothing. And we had to build, you know, in production, take that live running system and migrate it to a distributed architecture. And there was nothing off the shelf in, you know, storage technology, database technology that was even marketed to do what we needed to do at the time. Like we rejected a lot of things like MySQL cluster, like MongoDB, and ended up doing custom things just for Twitter. But when we started Fauna, there's only so many companies in the world, so many users who need like a hyperscale social graph. But there's a lot of people who need globally distributed, transactional, secure, private data access. So we wanted to build a more general purpose solution rather than just commercialize what we had done at Twitter.
Gotcha. So was a lot of what went into Fauna inspiration from what you guys were working on at Twitter?
It was our dream really was to let small teams like we were at Twitter. I mean, and when I joined, there were like five other engineers. Let teams like that build applications and stay focused for their entire journey on building their product and delivering their value to their users, not having to build infrastructure, not having to learn all these operational skills and re-architect things every time you grow 10x. And I think there's a lot of parallels there with what's happening in the crypto space now, especially
Mhm.
with distributed apps.
Yeah, it seems like a good fit if you're going distributed route to integrate blockchain in some kind of way. So what is Fauna more specifically? What are you guys trying to accomplish?
So Fauna is a serverless database. It offers a GraphQL API. It's designed to be as flexible as possible to build kind of general purpose user facing consumer or like SaaS applications. So things like pretty much anything with a web app, anything you would use on your phone could potentially be backed by something like Fauna.
Got it. Um, do you guys have any customers right now, or what do your clients look like? And do you guys have any use cases as examples?
We do. We our customers kind of segment. There's people building traditional SaaS applications. There's not really a blockchain connection there. There's people building traditional consumer applications, and there's people building dapps. Like Digital AX or Acore. And what we see from especially the people in the crypto space is, they're building either on chain or with a side chain or some solution like that. And they have additional, especially user data that they need to store off chain, make sure it's secure, private, but still, globally accessible, highly available, can be accessed from where the applications are deployed, usually browsers, mobile devices, that kind of thing. And it works really well with Fauna because then you get, effectively like your public, verifiable, but slow and transaction focused blockchain for your financial components, transactional components, whatever they may be. And then another place where you can both duplicate that data and slice and dice it, make it indexable, make it queryable, like you see with some of the other more vertically integrated or special purpose blockchain solutions that will take like Ethereum and let you query its metadata and that kind of thing. If you want to do that specifically for your own app, you're the only one who knows the semantics of your transactions, what your user base needs. So you can both duplicate that data and then decorate it in Fauna with additional application data that's not appropriate to shove through the blockchain for everything.
Gotcha. Um, how are you guys combining what you guys are doing with these APIs with blockchain? Are you using blockchain or wanting to use blockchain for the distributed database stuff, or do you want to use it for other purposes as well?
So Fauna uses an algorithm called Calvin, which is designed to be very low latency, but also, it's not it's private essentially. It's within Fauna's own global cluster, and that perimeter has to be secure. But that allows us to deliver a lot of the properties that blockchain has in a lower latency way. For example, Fauna is temporal, so you can audit everything that happens with the data in the database. You can go back in time and see, how did this user change? What's the trail of history for these particular Fauna transactions? You could potentially synchronize that with your blockchain transactions to make the blockchain transactions more queryable. But we see them, they're aligned kind of philosophically and in terms of the operational architecture. Fun is serverless. You don't have to deploy anything, you don't have to manage anything, you don't have to worry about setting up firewalls in AWS or that kind of thing. It's low latency because it's globally distributed. Wherever your users are, they can access Fauna. But at the same time, because it's not a blockchain itself, it offers a lot of the things that you're missing if you're trying to build basically a full featured consumer style application on a blockchain only.
Do you guys want to leverage blockchain in any kind of way, or do you feel like you have it figured out the way it is right now?
So we don't intend to change Fauna's core architecture, to integrate more blockchain concepts. What we want to do is make sure that Fauna's interfaces are adapted to the needs of people building on blockchain. So right now, Fauna's
Got it.
primary interface is GraphQL. A lot of people in the crypto community are familiar with GraphQL. They use it for their own applications and APIs. Making it easier to access, making it easier to, for example, import and export Ethereum or sidechains to Fauna, things specific to your application, will make it easier for people to build successful dApps on both whatever their chain of choice is and Fauna.
Got it. Are you guys mostly focused on the decentralized apps, or do you guys also want to work with traditional apps like on the iOS store and Android store? Or how broad do you guys want to get?
Yeah, I mean, we started working with traditional apps, and then we saw people from the distributed community coming looking for a solution like us. So this has been a a pull process for us. We're not blockchain native, you could say.
What kind of dApps have you guys been working with thus far?
So we've seen some stuff where there's like digital good transactions and NFTs are being exchanged, but there's also user credentials and profiles and additional data around that. We've seen storage applications where there's um, the core data is being put on chain, but then the metadata needs to be made accessible and indexable off chain and is replicated to Fauna, that kind of thing.
Okay, got it. What kind of ways do you guys want to improve upon this or scale it up for the rest of 2022? Or do you guys have like a roadmap or a timeline of things you want to do that you guys want to execute going into the rest of the year?
Yeah, so our team is about 50 people right now. We've been growing pretty steadily. We're mostly focused on two things, making Fauna itself easier to use and easier to operate. So like improving the GraphQL experience, adding more features like the import and export from other data sources, including Ethereum and similar chains. And then at the same time, kind of maturing the business experience, getting compliant with stuff like SOC. And I know like, the people building distributed apps, like speaking frankly, are not like super enthused about compliance and
Hmm.
regulation and that kind of thing. So it's a little bit less of a concern to people who are getting started in the DApp community. But at the same time, everyone who matures is going to face these same obstacles, things like GDPR, storing user data, you know, can you make it compliant and secure? Can you ensure that it's private? How do you slice and dice what goes on chain and what goes off chain and that kind of thing? So it's really these two focuses, making it making it easier and an easier and more complete application building experience, and then maturing the operational and compliance profile of the system so that we're there when people grow and start to need those kind of things.
Yeah, is there any kind of compliance or regulatory concerns in doing this that most people don't think about that you guys have thought of, or is it kind of minimal?
It's not minimal. I mean, one of the big things that has come up in the last couple years is really data residency. There's GDPR, but there's also a host of other, less known local laws, including in the US, that say that if you have a user base in some location, their data has to remain in that location, not just be
Hmm.
stored there, but you're not even supposed to like let it traverse outside of those geographic boundaries.
Hmm.
So, a feature we shipped last year is called region groups. And what that feature does is it lets you set up in Fauna specific logical databases where data within those databases is restricted in terms of its replication and its distribution. So then you can have one set of users who are in the US, they only interact with US servers and all their data remains in the US. At the same time, your users, like in Europe, they don't want their data in the US. So that creates a complicated infrastructure, operational experience unless you have
Hmm.
tools which support it directly. There's less of a concern for the on-chain data. It's all public anyway, and users are specifically, subscribing to submitting public data when they transact on a chain. But for everything that's not public, you really have to be, mindful of the data residency concerns.
Yeah, I've had discussions about that before in terms of doing things in specific jurisdictions with blockchain, with crypto, and then decentralized aspect of that. Like if you're doing something that's decentralized or distributed or even on blockchain, is that localized to a certain jurisdiction and do you have to follow certain guidance or is it out of that jurisdiction? Have you guys given that thought or pondered it? Like if you were doing something that was completely decentralized with the servers or with APIs, anything along that line where maybe it's outside of jurisdiction because it's centralized and doesn't necessarily belong to one locality? Or is that something you guys have pondered at all?
I mean, Fauna, speaking technically, is a fully distributed and decentralized system. It's just,
Hmm.
only operated by us. So
Right,
there's no Fauna like primary region or server. We can set up
right,
as many copies of the data around any specific geography that we please. But at the end of the day, you know, everyone is subject to some legal jurisdiction. So especially
sure.
as you start to interact with either other companies' services, you want to use the API for a game, for example, that game, that the company that makes that game has a legal jurisdiction. They're subject to law, including, how you treat the data from their users that you acquire from the API, or, any kind of financial thing that interacts with the traditional financial system also becomes subject to it. So I think, to the extent things are purely public, it's basically fine, but it's when you start to interact with existing data or resources that are already under legal constraints that you have to start to care about this stuff.
Right. One more question, then we'll start wrapping it up. On security with traditional APIs and stuff along these lines, is there security concerns or anything along those lines that would be more or less resolved using Fauna or that makes it safer to store data or to have servers set up in this kind of way?
Yeah, so Fauna offers a security layer called ABAC, attribute-based access control, which basically lets you, define in a very granular way who is allowed to interact with what parts of the data set in what way. So that makes it very easy to enforce at the database level, you know, what is accessible. And like a lot of times people get in trouble because if you try to add these kind of security controls in the application, then not only do they have to be correct, but the application itself has to be executed in a secure environment. And if you're writing most of your logic for your app, your business logic, like on the device, on the phone, in the browser, then you don't actually have a secure environment where
Hmm.
you can enforce security rules. So it's very helpful to have them in the database so deep that the database can then be publicly accessible over the internet like any other API, and Fauna offers you that.
Got it. Where can people go to learn more about Fauna and what you guys do and what you guys offer? Just the website? Do you guys have social media? Do you guys have a
Yeah,
community where people chat?
yeah, there's a Discord, there's a Twitter account at Fauna. Our website is fauna.com, Fauna, and it's free to use. If you scale up, then there are plans to pay for additional features, and you pay for per usage as you grow. It's completely serverless. So um, yeah, if you're familiar with GraphQL, if you're familiar with JavaScript, you'll feel right at home using Fauna.
Okay, perfect. Evan, thank you for taking the time to be on the show today to talk lives easier for dapps and applications in the space and what you guys are doing from a decentralized and distributed standpoint. I think is really cool. Very excited to see how you guys kind of grow going through the rest of 2022.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks for having me.
Of course, anytime. See you next time. Ciao.